Noah and Kate, Chapter 37. Kate reached across the table and covered Luna's wrinkled hand with hers. She squeezed gently. "You don't have to talk about this, Luna. I'm sorry for prying." No, said Luna, and Kate's heart fell when Luna dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. "Indeed, dear, it's a relief to talk about it again. About him. And as I said, I believe it might be helpful to you and Noah. You and Noah. Like they were a couple. Like he was sitting here beside her, listening as raptly as she was. If she wasn't careful, Kate was going to start crying again, too, and then both women would be bawling and sniffling over a Kincaid man they had tried to love. Luna inhaled shakily and smiled. "One night, after we closed the bookstore, I did something rather impetuous. I kissed him. I kissed him properly. Not the way the Hollywood stars kissed in the movies back then, not one of those chaste, frozen kisses, but a full, wanton kiss, if you know what I mean." Kate's eyebrows rose, but she tried not to look surprised. "I think I do." Luna let out a little laugh. "Yes, I know. It's always a shock to the younger generations when they find out they didn't invent sex." Kate dipped her head and bit her lip. "Busted." Now, of course, Ben was startled, and then embarrassed, then flustered, but finally he relented and kissed me back, Luna went on, and it was wonderful. It was as though everything had been in black and white a moment before, and suddenly the world exploded with color. I could feel it radiating from him, the sense of release, the surrender to his natural desires, the final wearing down of whatever restraints he had imposed on himself. And I'm certain he felt the same from me. I had simply been unable to go another moment without kissing him. Perhaps that desire he felt from me was what finally made him able to give in. "Give in?" Kate asked, still not understanding. "Do you mean because it wasn't proper back then?" "It wasn't proper, no, but certainly young people kissed each other, especially those in love. No, it turned out to be something else altogether, which came out when I made my next reckless move. I told him I wanted us to elope. This was not done, you understand, but there I was doing it. Girls did not ask their young men to marry them, let alone elope, but I didn't care. All I wanted in that moment was to marry him, and as quickly as possible." Oh boy, thought Kate, bracing herself for what Luna might say next. It didn't matter what decade it was. A woman was always at risk of heartbreak if she were the one to bring up marriage. Or maybe that was just her. He immediately stood away from me and looked at me with such an expression of puzzlement and dismay. After a moment he took my hand and we sat on the Chesterfield, and he told me how very sorry he was if he had given me the idea that he was ready to marry. Kate's eyes widened. "Are you kidding me? You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you, cornflowers and kittens and all that stuff? What the—" "He went on to explain," Luna said quickly, placating Kate. "He simply thought that our conversation, that first night I confessed my love to him, had impressed upon me that, though he loved me, he couldn't offer me anything. He was unable to support a wife and possibly children. And although the bookshop was doing much better since he'd hired me on, it would never pay really well. Not to the standard of living a Miss Travers was used to. At best, we could live together in the little flat upstairs, which was so very small and poky, or, God forbid, suffer through the cold and damp of his family's cabin. He couldn't even sell the cabin, he had said, with a kind of desperation. It wouldn't have been worth much in those days, but regardless, he had promised his father he would keep it in the family. He said he could never go back on his word like that." Kate frowned. She'd live in a cardboard box with Noah if he'd let her. "I see what you're thinking, and of course you're right. I told him I didn't care. I would happily live above the shop with him. But for how long? He'd said. What if we're there for 5 years? For 10? He couldn't promise he'd ever be able to afford a proper house or a place to raise children. He told me then that his father had been rather badly in debt at the time of his death, to friends, to neighbors, as well as the bank. He had a rather bad gambling problem, you see, poor man. Ben said it was his responsibility to make sure everyone was paid back. And to top it off, if he couldn't make the bookshop pay, he'd likely lose it to the bank and have to go to the city to find a job. And then we'd have no place to live at all. Luna sighed and took another steadying sip of tea. Kate sat forward. Your family had money, didn't they? Couldn't your parents have supported you both until you got on your feet? Luna laughed and put her hand to her heart. Oh, heavens, no, my dear. No, not at all. The idea never even came up, because I'm sure Ben knew as well as I did that my family would never approve of my marrying him. That's why I proposed an elopement. I would only have to tell them after it was done, when they couldn't do anything about it. To ask the Traverses to embrace a son-in-law from a poor Irish family of booksellers, the head of which had been a known gambler. She shook her head ruefully. No, it was one thing to allow me to work for Ben Kincaid. It was quite another to permit me to marry him. How could they have stopped you? Kate asked. You were 20 years old. You didn't need their permission. If we were able to live independently, that's true. Luna nodded. But Ben was telling me we couldn't. And without my parents' help. So what, you were just supposed to forget about each other? Kate asked, dumbfounded. It wasn't such an uncommon thing. Many young couples were divided over family and money and social class. It wasn't like it is today. But Luna, I know, dear, I know. Believe me, I was bitterly disappointed. I simply refused to accept it at first. I told him it didn't matter how long we had to live upstairs. I said I would get a job and help support us. I'd even spite my mother and work at Lillian's next door if need be. I said we would make it work, come what may, as long as we could be together. But Ben was an old-fashioned man and a very principled one. He said he could not allow his wife to work to help support him. Oh, for God's sake! Kate let her hand drop down on the table with a thud. Her teacup rattled in its saucer. That's such a sexist, ridiculous... It is now, Luna admonished gently. This was 1950, my dear. You must try to understand. Cedar Lake was a bit of a summer enclave for wealthy families, like mine and many others. Ours was one of the few who lived here full-time, because my father was a gentleman of leisure and didn't need to work. But almost everyone in town was well-to-do, at the very least. It was the people who kept the town running, the shopkeepers and restaurateurs and domestic staff, people like the Kincaids, who had to try to fit in with us. Their houses might be smaller and their cars less fancy, but everyone in town had an image to maintain, if they wanted to belong. And that image did not include one's wife working in a shop or living above a bookstore. At any rate, Luna put up a cautioning hand as Kate opened her mouth to protest. I felt very much as you do. I was so very angry, so terribly upset. Even when Ben took both of my hands in his and said that if I could wait for him, if I was prepared to wait for a time when he would finally be able to settle down, he would happily ask me to marry him. Properly, with my parents' blessing. Somehow that made me even more wretched. He had said it might be 10 years before he could clear his father's debts and see his sisters move out on their own, and finally be able to afford a house and a family of his own. It might even be 15 or 20. He asked me to be honest. Could I wait that long for him? Well, by this point I was crying and carrying on. I was utterly inconsolable, and I know I caused no little consternation in his heart that night. He told me he loved me passionately, that it was breaking his heart, but that he had no choice. And the truth was, I had no choice either. I couldn't bear the idea of living with my parents here in this house. Her eyes roamed the ceiling. For a decade, perhaps more, waiting for a man who was too proud and too traditional to throw off social expectations and simply marry me for love. And later, I came to curse myself for not being independent enough to strike out on my own. I could have left here. I could have found a job and supported myself. Perhaps Ben would have seen how we could have made it work, with both of us bringing in an income. Perhaps his attitude might have changed. She shrugged hopelessly. I'll never know. I wasn't brave enough to make my own way and still keep my dear Benjamin in my heart until the time was right for us to marry. Instead, I did what many young women of my time did. I took my wounded pride and broken heart and made the best of it. I telephoned Willis Hatch, the young man who had sent me all the flowers, including the yellow carnations, for rejected love, and I told him I would accept an invitation to dinner from him if he were willing to ask. He was delighted to think I had changed my mind about him. In truth, Kate, it was unforgivable to use him as I did. I made sure to have him pick me up for our date at the bookshop, so Ben could see. I wanted to make Ben jealous. I wanted him to know that he was losing me. Oh, it was petty and childish and such a mistake. I only wanted Ben to realize how silly he was being, but what I accomplished was much worse. I made him think that I didn't really love him. Luna looked utterly bereft, saying this. Kate leaned forward and squeezed her hand again. Of course you didn't, Luna. He knew how much you loved him. You proposed to him. How could he have been in any doubt? Well, you see, Luna fussed with her teacup. Forgive me, I haven't talked about this to anyone in so many years. And I do hope you won't judge my actions too harshly. Goodness knows I've judged myself. But you see, one night, Willis Hatch proposed to me. I didn't give him my answer straight away. I said I had to think about it. But I didn't have to think about it. I went straight to the bookstore and waited for Ben to close up. I had quit by then, of course, and told him I must speak with him. We went down to the lake and took a walk along the shore, and I told him about the proposal. I will marry Willis Hatch and move to Denver with him, and you and I shall never speak again, I said. Unless you say right now that you'll marry me instead. Oh, no, Kate breathed. Not an ultimatum. The nuclear option in any relationship, the very worst thing a woman could ever give a man she loved. The fastest way to wreck a good thing, whether the man caved or not. Especially if he caved, because it would always be there, straining between them until the cord twisted so tight it snapped. Luna nodded, slowly. I did. I really did. I must have sounded like a nasty, scheming little thing, on the lookout for a husband, any husband. Luna's expression morphed into an impression of a haughty debutante as she put on a shrill voice. If you won't marry me, I've got a fellow who will. So, what's your answer? I'm sure he knew you were simply... he must have known that you wanted to marry him, Kate protested. You had already rejected Willis. Ben must have known that. But don't you see, that only made it worse. I was willing to marry virtually anyone rather than wait for Ben. Or at least that's what I supposed he thought for many years. Because, my dear, the smile he gave me... Oh, Kate. Her eyes began to film over again. It was so very like that tender smile he gave me that first night I declared my love for him. So poignant and gentle and sad. He said he wanted me to be happy, and if Willis Hatch could make me so, he wished us nothing but joy. I should have told him no one could ever make me happy but him. I should have told him that I would wait for him as long as it took. I should have apologized for even thinking of marrying anyone else. I should have promised to help him make a life for us, married or not. I should have done anything other than what I did. "What did you do?" asked Kate, although she already knew. "I married Willis Hatch a month later and moved to Denver." Luna said this so bleakly, with such helplessness in her voice, that Kate's heart nearly broke. Even the way Luna said his whole name, as though a Willis Hatch were a thing, an object, a law firm she worked at, and not a man she would marry, made Kate unbearably sad. "It was a foolish, foolish thing." Luna's brow furrowed as she berated herself. "The day of the wedding I nearly called it off, but my parents, who had invited 100 people to match the 100 on the Hatch side, were quite clear. If I embarrassed them by calling off this wedding, I was not welcome back in this house." "Oh, Luna, that's terrible," Kate gasped. "Dear God, I can't believe your parents would treat you like that." "My sister Phil, Horatia Philomena, I should say, only the family called her Phil, had married well and settled in Boston, and my brother Alphonse had married into a Philadelphia banking family. I was expected to do the same. The Hatch family summered in Cedar Lake, but were very socially important in the city, and Willis was destined to run one of his father's firms in Denver. And so the wedding was a grand affair out there, designed more to impress others than to please us. It would have been mortifying to the Traverses if I'd cried off." "Luna, this sounds like something out of Jane Austen." Kate shook her head. "I had no idea this kind of thing still happened in this century, or the last one." Luna sighed and lifted her shoulders in a tiny shrug. "This was the world into which I was born. But I fear I'm being tiresome with my digressions. Let me simply say this. I tried valiantly to enjoy being Mrs. Willis Hatch, living the life of a socialite in Denver. Willis didn't know Jane Austen from John D. Rockefeller, but I tried to pretend that didn't matter. I looked around at my wealth and all my pretty things and the lovely car he gifted me on my 21st birthday, and I reminded myself daily that I had what so many young women wanted so very desperately. I had an uncomplicated husband who loved me. I had a grand house in the best part of town. I had a cook and a housekeeper, and of course my car and my new wardrobe, and a very generous allowance to spend on whatever I wanted. And I was miserable. When my husband climbed into bed with me at night, I cringed at his touch. Forgive me for being indelicate, my dear, but relations between us were something I endured rather than enjoyed. He wasn't unkind to me, but it was at those moments that I fully understood how much I still loved Benjamin and how very much I missed him. And one day, while I was shopping in town, that's all I ever did, shop and have lunch with the wives of my husband's business associates, I came across a bookstore. I simply broke down, weeping uncontrollably and making a fool of myself. I went home and told Willis I wanted a divorce. He was shocked beyond measure, of course, and wouldn't agree to anything so scandalous as a divorce. But eventually he agreed to an annulment on some legal technicality or other. I don't even remember what the excuse was. My parents were furious. His parents were furious. It was the talk of the town for several months as everything was sorted out. I was able to stay with one of Willis's cousins, a young woman very much like myself, who took pity on me, because of course my parents wouldn't take me back, and Willis was so humiliated he refused me any financial support at all. Of course I can't blame him, but I really was left with nothing. It was the loneliest, most trying time of my life. "You didn't go back to Ben?" Kate asked, with the naive hope of someone who has seen the movie before, but somehow still believes the ending might change. "How could I?" Luna asked plaintively. "I had made a stand. I had chosen a loveless marriage over him. I couldn't expect him to still want me. But you didn't even try? Luna swallowed, casting her eyes downward. As it happened, within 18 months, both of my parents had passed away, 9 months apart. Phil and Al had no interest in this house, and so it came to me. And so, she swallowed again, not from nervousness, Kate guessed, but from not wanting to speak. So I did come back. Kate sat back and exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for some time. Images of young Luna driving around 1950s Cedar Lake in a big, shiny car with aerodynamic wings and white-walled tires filled her mind. The very epitome of an independent young woman of means, a woman with a second chance at love. You came back, Kate prompted, excitement growing in her voice. You were free of your parents and your husband, and you had this house. So what happened with Ben? Luna shook her head sadly. He had married Maureen a month before I returned. What? Kate nearly jumped out of her chair. He what? This outburst actually made Luna laugh. She patted Kate's hand affectionately. Quite the soap opera, isn't it? Oh my, it was worthy of a Gothic novel. You don't even know what had been going on in my absence. Apparently, we had been overheard that night, walking along the shore, when I had given him the ultimatum to marry me or I'd marry someone else. And so gossip flew about town that he had gotten me into trouble and refused to marry me. And so that's why I went away. This wasn't true, of course, but that's the problem with rumors and gossip. One is on trial without ever having the opportunity of defending oneself. I think, perhaps, Ben knew he had to restore his reputation in town if he wanted his business to prosper. Maureen was a decent, respectable girl, and she was willing to marry him despite the gossip. They lived above the shop, in the flat Ben had thought was too humble for me. There I was with this grand old place all to myself, and yet I would have given anything to be sharing that little flat with him. Kate had pushed her hands up into her hair, her elbows propped on the table, and was staring at Luna. I can't believe what I'm hearing, she said, dumbfounded. So, did you talk to him? I mean, you were living in the same town. If you think the gossip affected him badly, what do you think the town thought of me? As if falling pregnant and having to leave town to have a secret baby wasn't bad enough, or so they believed. Then there was the scandal over having left my marriage. Women didn't leave their husbands. Oh, I know. It just wasn't done in polite society. No, I decided it was best for him if I stayed away. He seemed happy with Maureen. Oh, and within a few months, she was expecting their son, Brian. And since the whole wretched affair had been my fault entirely, I thought it best to avoid him. I owed him that much. But... Kate knew there was an objection here somewhere. She just had trouble sputtering it out. You must have known you were back. Didn't he try to contact you? As a friend, if nothing else? Married men weren't friends with single women in those days, my dear. And especially in our case, with everyone thinking he had gotten me into trouble and had refused to do his duty by me. So you simply lived here? On your own? You never went into town, or... I tried to avoid going into town as much as I could. I got what I needed from Dunmore or the city, and when the car became too troublesome, I started having what I needed delivered from Dunmore or farther afield. I'm afraid I just couldn't keep up with the maintenance on the place myself. But then, after a time, it suited me that it seemed abandoned. I could keep to myself and live quietly, as I pleased. I kept up with the changes in Ben's life, of course. The birth of Brian, Maureen's illness and her passing, God rest her soul. and naturally, Brian's marriage and the birth of the twins. Kate was about to ask why Luna hadn't contacted Ben after Maureen had died, but held her tongue. On some level, she understood why Luna would have chosen to stay away. It wasn't a choice she would have made, but perhaps there had just been too much water flowing beneath that particular bridge. Still, the sadness of the whole situation struck Kate as pointlessly, uselessly tragic. Luna seemed to sense Kate's thoughts. She sought out Kate's eyes and spoke. "He was happy, my dear," she said, spacing out the words for emphasis. "And when you truly love someone, their happiness is so much more important to you than your own. It's true, I would have made different, better choices if I had been wiser, or less starry-eyed, at least. But that's what I hope you'll take from my experience, my dear. I don't know what my life would have looked like if I had waited for Ben, but it is the greatest regret of my life that I didn't get to find out." "Oh, Luna, that's just so sad," Kate said, for the moment ignoring the life lesson Luna was so blatantly trying to impart. "You never saw him again?" "I did," Luna said, her eyes moistening again, but glimmering with that sweet softness of love. "He fell ill just after Brian was killed. I think the shock of it was too much for him, and I think, in truth, he died of a broken heart. I can't even imagine the sorrow of losing a child, especially in such a sudden, violent way. I went to see him in hospital, and we spoke for the first time in more than 40 years. It was—" Luna's eyes fixed on the middle distance, as if rewatching the memory replay in her mind. "It was lovely. We talked for a few hours and reminisced. Finally, he said he had always loved me, and that the one regret of his life was that he hadn't eloped with me that night." Okay, this was too much. This was just melodrama on steroids. This was beyond anything Kate had ever imagined. She rose from the chair and began pacing the kitchen, hands on hips, trying not to cry. Janie Mac, this was a gut punch of a story. She glanced at Luna, barely 5 feet tall, weighing probably 85 pounds, sitting primly in her blouse and cardigan and wool skirt in front of her Royal Doulton china teacup, having lived through a passionate, tragic love that had led to nothing but a lonely existence hidden from view. On impulse, Kate went over to her and put her arms around her, kissing her sweetly on her soft, wrinkled cheek. "I am so sorry, Luna," she whispered. "I have no words. Oh, my dear, I didn't tell you all of this to upset you." Luna patted Kate's back gently and returned her kiss. "It happened so long ago now, and I am content here with my garden and my television shows. And of course, as you know, Noah comes by so often to help me out. Quite by coincidence, you know. I took a tumble on the stairs once and had to call an ambulance. That's how we met. Ever since that day, he's always looked out for me, the dear boy, without ever knowing my connection to his family. It's a true delight to see him, always. He does remind me so much of my Ben." "I'd like to see those pictures," Kate said, dabbing at her eyes as she straightened up, "if you still have them." "Of course," Luna said. "Come through. We ought to be sitting in the parlor anyway. So much more comfortable than these old chairs." Kate followed her into the stuffy parlor with the heavy furniture and dusty rose carpet, the doilies and the figurines. Luna retrieved a photo album from a shelf above the piano and came to sit beside Kate on one of the formal little settees. "I haven't looked at this in years," Luna mused, wiping dust from the blue fake leather cover with photographs written in a swirling gold font across the front. She opened the album to the first page, revealing a collection of small black and white photos beneath a crispy, yellowing plastic sheet. "This is me when I was a girl," Luna pointed, and Kate leaned closer to look at the photo. A pretty young girl with a short, curly bob stood with her arms around a taller girl and a serious-looking young boy. That's Phil and Al, of course, and me in the middle. She pointed to another picture of a chubby baby in white booties and a fussy pinafore. I have no idea who that is. Could be any of us. Kate took in every picture as Luna flipped through the pages, watching as the children grew and Luna became more recognizable. The photo of the house back in its heyday was the most surprising, and for the first time Kate fully realized what a truly gorgeous Victorian house it was underneath the ravages of time, and could be again, with a little love. Luna turned a page, and a picture jumped out at Kate. There was Noah, standing in front of Lizzie and Fitz, his arms crossed over his chest, a broad smile on his face. It wasn't really Noah, of course. It was Benjamin Kincaid. The set of his shoulders, the cut of his jaw, the tall, lean form that was graceful and yet solid all at once. He looked so much like his grandson that Kate gasped. He does look like him, doesn't he? Luna said, not specifying which him. Noah looks more and more like him each day. Does he ever? Kate breathed, leaning in to look closer. It's unbelievable. Has Noah ever seen these pictures? No, I've never shown him, Luna said. You should. I bet he and Paige would love to see them. Luna flipped a few more pages, and another photo of Ben grabbed Kate's attention. He was caught in mid-laugh, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, around a table with a group of other young people who were also smoking and hamming it up for the camera. Luna was sitting opposite him, her smile radiant, youth and beauty and love shining from within. This is wonderful, Luna, Kate said. I really hope you'll show these to Noah and Paige. I bet they've never seen their grandfather like this. Perhaps I will, said Luna. Perhaps I can just say I used to work for him, and that's why I have the photos. Kate looked at her. I think you could tell them your story, if you wanted to. I think they'd like to know more about Ben and the kind of man he was. Perhaps, Luna mused, but Kate didn't quite believe her. I really wanted you to hear my story, my dear, Luna said, her eyes roaming over more photographs of Ben and Lizzie and Fitz as it had looked more than 60 years ago. I've seen the way Noah looks at you, and the way you light up whenever you talk about him. It makes my heart hurt to think that you two lovely young people living in this modern age, who have nothing standing between you at all, are going to make the same mistake Ben and I did. If we could have made a go of it, I know you and Noah certainly could find a way. Luna, you really are genuinely sweet to think so, said Kate, clasping the other woman's hand in hers. Her throat tightened up, but she managed not to cry. You and Ben were a wrong place, wrong time type of couple, from the sounds of it. Noah and I are different. What's stopping us is... Luna's eyebrows rose in a questioning expression. Is that marriage is wholly unsuited to the human heart. Kate finished miserably. His heart, anyway. Have you told him how you feel? Kate swallowed. Yes. I told him I love him. Luna brightened. And what did he say? Nothing. Not a single word. Luna's eyes took on a worried look, as if a quiet, oh dear, had slipped out. Then Kate could see her thinking, her eyes moving as if she were casting about for something positive to take out of this, some glimmer of hope she could offer. It's okay, Luna, really, Kate preempted her. I'm just sad about it. He never promised me love or marriage or anything more than one summer. I'll just have to get over him, somehow. Kate's phone vibrated in the pocket of her capris, and she jumped. An incoming text, a single little blip of vibration that had the power to send her heart racing. Please let it be Noah, she thought, fervent as a prayer. Please, God, let it be Noah. She stared at the screen and saw the bright notification bubble about a new text. From Jeff. Hi, Kate. Lunch today was awesome. It's such a blast talking to you about Zuzu's pedals. I think you've really got something there. I'll be stuck here at the office in Dunmore till about 8, but would you like to meet me at Room for Dessert, say 8:30? I got an idea to run by you. Kate sighed and swallowed hard. Maybe focusing on work was the right thing to do. Maybe crying over lost Kincaids was no way to soothe her broken heart. She typed "sure" into the text bubble and closed her eyes.